Schizophrenia. It's a word we all know, right? It feels so solid, so scientific. But what if the whole idea was built on something a lot less stable? Today, we are digging deep into the very origins of this diagnosis, asking a pretty radical question. Was it ever built on solid ground to begin with?
Now, our guide on this journey is Mary Boyle's really critical analysis in her book, Schizophrenia, A Scientific Delusion. We're going to be focusing on her research into how the whole concept got started and then how the official rules for diagnosing it even came to exist.
And that really leads us to the heart of the matter. Is schizophrenia a disease that we discovered, like finding a new planet? Or is it an idea that we invented? That one question is what Boyle's entire analysis really hinges on.
Look, most of us hear schizophrenia and we just accept it as a fact of science. But Boyle argues that if we really want to understand it, we have to rewind all the way to the beginning and ask, what was the actual evidence that sparked this idea in the first place?
Because here's the thing about science. For any medical diagnosis to be considered valid, I mean really legit, it has to start with one absolutely essential ingredient. If you don't have it, everything else you build on top is just, well, it's going to be wobbly. So what's that secret ingredient?
Well, let's talk about the scientific gold standard. There's actually a proper way that medical concepts are supposed to be constructed. It's a process that takes you from just noticing something to having a valid diagnosis.
And it all starts with something called a hypothetical construct. Now, I know that sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It just means a scientist first has to observe a consistent pattern, a bunch of signs and symptoms that reliably show up together like clockwork. You can't see the disease itself, but you can see the pattern it leaves behind. Diabetes is the perfect example of this done right. The idea didn't just pop out of thin air. It started because doctors kept seeing the same pattern over and over, patients who were incredibly thirsty, exhausted, and losing weight. The key here is the pattern came first. So the million-dollar question Boyle asks is, did the concept of schizophrenia follow that same scientific roadmap?
So let's just break it down for diabetes. First, you see that recurring pattern of symptoms. Then you find a reliable physical marker, in this case, sweet-tasting urine, that's always there with the pattern. And finally, you refine it with better tools, like a blood glucose test. See? Each step is built on solid, observable proof.
Okay, so now let's apply that same standard to the founders of schizophrenia. We're going to look at the big names, Kraepelin, Bleuler, and Schneider, and ask a very simple question. Did they actually find a consistent, naturally occurring pattern to begin with?
Our story starts with a German psychiatrist, Emil Kraepelin. We're talking around the turn of the 20th century. He's the one who came up with dementia praecox, which was the direct forerunner to schizophrenia. His work is basically ground zero for this whole concept.
So Kraepelin claimed he'd identified a single disease. He took a whole bunch of different behaviors and lumped them together under this new label. He argued they were all caused by two deep problems, a weakening of emotional activities and a loss of inner unity. Basically, the mind shattering into pieces.
But here it is, the big question. Did he ever actually provide the evidence that all these different things really belong together? Did they show up as a predictable pattern, the same way that thirst and lethargy did for diabetes?
Well, according to Boyle's deep dive into his original writings, the answer is a pretty clear no. And this quote from her book really nails it. She's saying that when you actually read Kraepelin's work, you literally can't figure out which specific behaviors he used to come up with his idea. The proof for that consistent pattern just isn't there. Now, other folks came along later, like Eugene Bleuler, who actually gave us the word schizophrenia, and Kurt Schneider. They tweaked the idea. But here's the catch. They built their houses on top of Kraepelin's foundation. And if that foundation, that initial proof of a pattern, was never there, well, the whole building is on shaky ground.
So this leads us to a really fascinating puzzle. If the scientific foundation was missing from the very beginning, how on earth did we end up with these super detailed official rule books for diagnosing it?
I mean, today we have these massive authoritative manuals, right? The World Health Organization has one, and in the US there's the DSM. These books are the Bibles of diagnosis. They give clinicians an exact checklist of symptoms to look for.
And in the world of science, these checklists have a name: correspondence rules. Again, sounds fancy, but all it means is these are the specific, observable signs that a doctor has to see before they can infer something unobservable, like schizophrenia. They're the official bridge between what you see and what you diagnose. But what's really wild is that this whole checklist approach is incredibly new. It wasn't until the DSM-3, all the way in 1980, that psychiatry even created these specific rules. Before that, it was way more subjective. Later versions have tweaked the lists, but the whole checklist game started in 1980.
And you have to understand, this is a really big deal. When you publish an official set of diagnostic criteria, you're making a massive scientific claim. You are telling the world that these specific symptoms are a real pattern that actually clusters together in nature, a pattern that has been seen and proven.
And this, right here, is the fundamental contradiction that Boyle points out. It's almost like someone wrote a super detailed official rulebook for a game that maybe was never proven to exist in the first place.
So let's just lay it all out, side by side. On the one hand, you have the foundational work from guys like Kraepelin, which seems to have completely skipped that crucial first step of proving a consistent pattern exists. But then, on the other hand, decades later, you get these official rulebooks with detailed checklists that are written as if that foundational work was rock solid.
And that leaves us with this one giant, unavoidable question. If that original, naturally occurring pattern was never actually proven to exist, then what exactly are these incredibly influential diagnostic rules for? It's a question that really shakes one of the most famous concepts in all of psychology right to its core.